Hey, welcome back to the NOTCAST. I think it's number 374 today. It is Sunday, 7th of April, 2024. A few weeks ago, I asked if viewers had any questions, and yes, you did, so thank you very much. I'm going to go through those as and when I feel like it. So the ones where I do I talk about the albums. There's lots and lots and lots of homework that goes into those. And then there's lots of listening and hours of prep. And it feels a little bit like sitting an exam nobody ever asked me to sit, where I kind of go deep undercover, to quote Beverly Hills Cop 2, and really try to get under the skin of the records and really learn more about them and as much about them as I can, and revisit old things and go, well, I've been listening to this record, let's say whatever it is, for 30, 40 years. And I've never really fully grasped everything that goes with it, all the depths that go with it. So sometimes it's nice just to do one without much planning, without a crib sheet. I've got some props around me, and the first question I'm going to answer is from Run Out Grooves. So thank you for asking, when did music stop being background noise and become a way of life? Well, to me, music has felt like a way of life for about 45 years. So one of my very first memories, the four first memories I can recall, the fourth one is from the summer of 1977. I remember sitting out in the garden at mum and dad's with my brother, and there was a ring on the doorbell, and my grandma came around and she had bought me a bootleg Star Wars t-shirt. And I was like so happy. I was the mutts nuts. I had a Star Wars t-shirt. And Star Wars was like the most amazing thing ever. So the first time where I became really aware of the importance of Star Wars, or more correctly, the importance of music, was watching Star Wars at the cinema in the summer of 1977. Here is a repressing of the John Williams soundtrack double album. I bought this a few years ago, actually, off Amazon when Lucasfilm did the reprints of them, and this one, if I remember correctly, is coloured vinyl. It is a kind of gold, and I thought, oh, it's about time I treated myself to the Star Wars soundtrack on vinyl, because I had, I think we had a tape of it or something way back when, and in the 70s you couldn't really experience films at home in any tangible, meaningful manner unless it was on television, and so your opportunities to see films were really, really limited. You saw them at the cinema, and they came out again at the cinema if you were really, really lucky. And then maybe a few years later, a minimum of 3 years later, they were shown on television. And so that means that by the time Star Wars started to appear on television in the UK, probably about 1981, 1982, and that meant that if you were one of the posh families and you'd rented a video recorder from Blake's in Cottridge, like my family had, you then had the opportunity to record the film onto a VHS tape, or you could buy it for £75. But generally, I think inflation adjusted, that's something like £300 now. The idea of buying a VHS tape for £300 probably only now sits in the people that have got the pre-certification copies of Cannibal Holocaust, of which there's probably only about 10 left in the world, and they're all mouldy. Whereas in those days, it was a prestige thing to have a VHS of Star Wars. So if you wanted to experience Star Wars at home anytime you wanted, really you couldn't do it unless you had the read-along books or you had the soundtrack albums. So we had the soundtrack album so that I could relive the film in my own imagination by listening to the music. Hang on, I think I'm going to sneeze. Be glad you didn't see that. Some people, they sneeze when the sun comes onto them. This is the sunniest day we've had so far this year, so of course I had to sneeze whilst on camera. Absolutely typical. But if you wanted to re-experience Star Wars, you had to record it off television, and it wasn't on television until 1982. You had to go to the cinema when it was re-released, or you had to get the soundtrack album. So I think I got the soundtrack album with this gatefold insert here, and obviously this lovely picture of Darth on the back. This isn't the original LP, because obviously the original LP, little 4-year-old me wouldn't have had a chance in hell of looking after it at all. 50-something me stands a slightly better chance, but still not, amazing or outstanding looking after Star Wars. And And so for me, that was the first time I really became aware of the importance of music. Because you think you watch Star Wars and you don't have the soundtrack, and like it's not quite so good. I don't know if you've ever seen the making of Star Wars documentaries. You almost definitely have, and it's got the onset audio of Darth Vader as voiced by Dave Prowse in a Norfolk accent with no music going, "Commander, tear this ship apart," etc. Sounding like he's just going to instruct you to look for his tractor. And that was the first time I was aware really of the importance of music and how important music was. John Williams, who's obviously still scoring films to this day, an important part of my life at that point, really kind of opens up to me the importance of movies and movie soundtracks. And as I said, I think I said, my life didn't make a huge amount of sense. By the way, this is the again the gold vinyl Disney repressing of Star Wars Empire Strikes Back. But when I was growing up, life didn't make a huge amount of sense to me. I was growing up in Birmingham in a crappy little suburb, and life was just a series of repetitive events. So it was get up, go to school, have lunch, run around the playground for a bit, come back home, watch television, be a little bit bored, have dinner, go to bed. And there was no arc to life. There was no progression to life when I was that age. It was just, I'm repeating the constant same things with the idea of like making tiny incremental differences into the narrative of my life. Like Sisyphus going up the mountain to find the rock rolling down. The rock rolls down as soon as you close your eyes and go to bed every day. And lo and behold, you start again. This is the Return of the Jedi soundtrack, by the way. Again, I think this is the gold vinyl version there. Which I bought discounted from Amazon about 6 years ago. Limited edition gold coloured vinyl. And again, I had the original Return of the Jedi soundtrack album, but it wasn't in a gatefold in 1983, and it wasn't on gold vinyl, but it was only one LP, which felt a little cheeky to me, but so be it. Then watching those films, I had a sense that there was a greater purpose to reality and to life. There was a narrative, there was a story which you could go through. The traditional thing called the hero's journey, which I believe a screenwriter called Joseph Campbell talked about. So you think about narratives, there's a crisis. Well, the stasis is the first thing that you pick up with, the state of things. In any narrative, there's normally, this is the way things are. Then there's a crisis. Something comes in to threaten the narrative. And for example, in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, another one of my picks here, that crisis was, alien abduction or alien visitation or UFOs flying over Wyoming or wherever it is. And so that's the crisis. And then the crisis is, how do I deal with putting things back to the way that they were, i.e. a James Bond film, Save the World Again, the belly gets ejected into space, or to getting to the point of what they call resolution, which is either the character development or the conclusion and neutralization of the crisis, whatever the crisis might be. So, for example, if you think about Close Encounters of the Third Kind, for example, from a narrative perspective, the stasis is obviously Roy Neary working in the power plant. The crisis is the visitation by the aliens that then leads into the end of his relationship and the discovery that there is the Devil's Tower, and then there is the visitation by the aliens at the end, all that kind of stuff. And the resolution is, sorry to spoil a 45-year-old movie here, by the way, 47 years old, but the resolution is he gets on a spaceship. So there you have it. But again, the music helped me understand and give a shape and a structure to the life that I was living in, which previously was lacking shape and structure and narrative and conclusion. And I wanted an answer to the question that we all ask, especially the people in Blade Runner, which is, who are we? Why are we here? What's the purpose? What is the meaning of life? As the Monty Python song goes. And film, of course. But that was where I first became aware that music wasn't just background noise. It spoke to and informed your emotional choices as you went through a series of developments, and it telegraphed how you felt at any one particular point. So I became very aware that music, a series of organised noise, was something that would start to shape the world that we lived in and inform the kind of feelings that you had about various things. This was then further followed by Wednesdays, Now, that doesn't make any sense unless you lived in the UK. Star Trek, the original TV series, was on Wednesdays at 6 o'clock on BBC Two. I watched them all. Then the film came out in 1979. I think I saw the film at the now fire derelict, burnt out Kings Heath cinema. And watched the film there. Again, the music by Jerry Goldsmith provided a sense of narrative and structure and understanding around it. This is the soundtrack LP to Star Trek: The Motion Picture. This is a soundtrack LP to Alien, again by Jerry Goldsmith. Again, another film which started to impact upon my emotional state. Now, Alien was shown on television a lot. I became adept at programming the video recorder and recording Alien and hoping that my parents didn't change the channel so I could actually just watch Alien at some point. I did that with The Thing, I did that with Escape from New York, I did that with a number of horror movies. So my way of making sense of the world was to watch films and to see stories and progressions that happened in there. You know, get the girl, kill the baddies, save the entire planet, as the Pop Will Eat Itself song said. And then I started to watch films by John Carpenter. So films like Halloween, The Fog, Escape from New York, The Thing, Christine, Starman, Big Trouble in Little China, those type of things. As a 12, 13-year-old, I remember my the first film I saw of John Carpenter's in the cinema was Big Trouble in Little China, because it was a PG in 1986 at the Tivoli, which is now the Electric Cinema, which is then probably going to be turned into luxury urban living and another set of fucking flats. And I remember when I was watching, waiting to start Big Trouble in Little China, I was reading a book, and the guy came out and said, do you want me to start the film? And I'm like, yeah, I'm just reading a book, because otherwise there's nothing to do. And he was like, oh, okay, I was waiting for you to finish reading the book. And I was like, well, it's very nice of you to ask, but I was waiting for you to show the film. Very classic British example of crosstalk and overtalk there. So Escape from New York, again, the soundtrack to this by John Carpenter started to open my mind a little bit to what soundtracks could be. So this and a lot of the other John Carpenter films moved away from the classical orchestral arrangements to arrangements which had basically a load of bloody synthesizers in. And that's films like Assault on Precinct 13, The Fog, Halloween, Escape from New York. Obviously, by the way, here's the John Carpenter and Trent Reznor remix of the Halloween theme tune, which are also kind of recently issued on vinyl on Anthology 1 and 2 by John Carpenter. This one featuring a 7-inch single, I believe, which has the Village of the Damned and Body Bags theme on. So these are re-recordings of the film soundtrack themes, the most iconic parts of the John Carpenter soundtracks, which he's done recently with his live band. And then the Anthology 2 again features movie themes 1976 to 1988, featuring themes from Halloween 2, Prince of Darkness, The Thing, The Fog, Halloween itself, Escape from New York, Big Trouble in Little China. And these are on, I think it's Thing Blue Vinyl, I think it's called. Oh, hello, I'm Thing Blue Vinyl, which came out, I think, relatively recently. And I love the fact that, you know, John Carpenter's taken to presenting his music, his film music, live on stage, but also re-recording everything. So I get more albums by a guy whose work I really, really like. And John Carpenter's film soundtrack activity was defined by having to operate on a budget. So he didn't have a huge amount of money. He had, you know, a synthesizer and a fairly primitive way of playing, and did the soundtracks himself and created themes which were 3-4 minutes of electronic moody music made on synthesizers and keyboards and sequencers and things. It didn't really sound like anything else. It didn't sound classical in any way. It wasn't what he called Mickey Mousing. So it was themes and textures and moods. And then suddenly I thought, well, movie soundtracks don't just have to be sweeping orchestras telling you what to feel at any given minute. But also to create a general feel, an atmosphere, an air, a menace. And that was where I kind of thought, okay, so music isn't just background noise, it's part of the overall malaise of movie soundtracks. And then I think about some of the other movie soundtracks which I got to liking. Blue Thunder here, the John Badham film, music by Arthur Rubinstein. And again, this is a mostly electronic score, so it's kind of pulsing and dark and thematic. Like the film, by the way. I do like the film, but it is very old. And then moved into movie soundtracks by Tangerine Dream, who I've mentioned before. Specifically, the soundtrack to Thief, the Michael Mann movie from 1981. This is a series of 7 or 8 really kind of, how shall I describe it? Pulsing, thematic, sequence-based, keyboard-based kind of electronic workouts. I absolutely love this. I could live in this. It was just a glorious album that changed my conception of what a soundtrack could be. There was also the soundtrack to the film The Keep, which I've mentioned before, which I absolutely love. Again, a Michael Mann film, not released officially, and certainly not on vinyl until I think Record Store Day 2021. Although parts of The Keep, and I loved The Keep, and I still do, were on the Logos Live album, which I mentioned in the previous episode about bands I wish I'd seen. There was also, Tangerine Dream chose cool films. They did Risky Business, they did Firestarter, which again is a horror movie based upon Stephen King. Catnip for me. I was like, brilliant, love it, fantastic. Moody synths, horror movie, perfect for me as an 11-year-old in 1984. And then that moved on a little bit. We had soundtracks to things like Scarface, and we had perhaps the most influential one, the one that most of you will know, Axel F by Harold Faltermeyer, the soundtrack to Beverly Hills Cop. Harold Faltermeyer is probably best known as, or at least before Axel F, as the engineer that worked on all of Giorgio Moroder's activities. So I Feel Love by Donna Summer, the soundtrack to Scarface, Cat People, all that type of stuff. Effectively got promoted to head honcho and did this wonderful instrumental workout. And you will know it, Axel F, featuring the 12-inch here and the Eminem remix of the title track there, as well as a bunch of 7-inches. So again, if you were into movies in the 80s and trying to make sense of life and what it was all about, then you'll have Axel F. And you'll have this, this is the Spanish version of Axel F, by the way, one of the first singles I ever bought, with a hole in the middle. And I'm going to talk about that hole in a minute. Ooh, misses. And then there's the UK single. Here's the Fletch theme. Actually, really love the Fletch theme. Terrible movie, great theme score, absolutely brilliant. Top Gun, well, we all know about Top Gun, don't we? Featuring Steve Stevens on guitar. And then, you buy the soundtrack album because you go, well, I really like the theme music. And then you end up going, oh, it's a pop compilation with Kenny Loggins, Loverboy, Cheap Trick, Berlin, Marietta, Miami Sound Machine. And you kind of go, oh, all right, maybe not so great, eh? Maybe not. Following on from things like deeply loving Giorgio Moroder, Harold Faltermeyer, Tangerine Dream, John Carpenter, I then went to non-soundtrack artists that were in roughly the same arena. And those were people that specialised in electronic music with synthesizers. My dad had some Tangerine Dream albums, so I borrowed those and taped those. He had some albums by Jean-Michel Jarre as well, which, again, his shows were broadcast on television. Big instrumental electronic synthesizer epics, which I absolutely loved. And at the same point, I was starting to get into a slightly different form of music as well. So hearing the instrumental tracks or hearing the pop tracks that were on movie soundtracks, I ended up kind of thinking about, well, what else is there that's in there? And of course, a film that very recently has come back to the cinemas, Ghostbusters. This is one of the first 7-inch singles I ever bought. Hence you can see by the fact that it's got this brown oxidization, because it was a cheaply made picture disc in the shape of good old Casper the Friendly Ghost there. And I just have to do that because I could, and I bought I loved Ghostbusters as a kid in 1984, so I bought the 7-inch picture disc here. I bought the 12-inch, the soundtrack LP with music by Elmer Bernstein, but again, disco tracks and pop tracks and all that kind of stuff. And I realised that actually movie soundtracks, they were starting to present as compilation albums of pop music. Kind of like Now 80 or Now 85 or Now 22 or whatever, but all songs that were played in the film. And that was where a lot of the crossover came from at the time. Very important part of my education. The soundtrack to Terminator by Brad Fiedel featured a girl group called the Cherry Bombs that weren't particularly good. In fact, very generic and sounded like the band that's in Thomas Dolby's Howard the Duck. But also kind of, I listened to that because, you know, if you buy the soundtrack LP, right, you're going to listen to the whole LP, aren't you? You're not just going to pick the needle up and skip past the pop tracks. You're going, well, I've paid for them. I'm going to listen to them. I'm going to hear them. And then I started to hear in the music, in the pop music that was on those, things which were starting to change who I was, or I was starting to feel things in those pop soundtracks. So I went, okay, so there's more to it than just a bunch of noise. There's something that really could stick with me. And so the really revelatory track for me is on Pet Shop Boys, actually. And this is the one where suddenly I was like, right, everything has changed. Nothing can ever be the same again. So my friend Mark, who was born on the same day as me in the same hospital, went to the same school, still a pal to this day. I've known him all my life pretty much, or at least it feels like it. Liked bands like the Smiths, Pet Shop Boys, and we'd go over to his house, listen to music, and he'd play me music. You know, we'd play racing games and stuff on the Atari ST, and then, you know, we'd put music on whilst we were doing it, and we'd talk. And I borrowed a copy of Pet Shop Boys, actually, because I liked what I'd heard. And then we turned the LP over, side 2, and this song genuinely changed my life. It couldn't happen here. There, side 2, track 1 or track 6, it couldn't happen here. This amazing socio-political, economic deconstruction of life in Britain. I'd always felt very alone in the world until I heard that song, if that makes sense. I felt that nobody really ever quite understood me. They didn't understand my worldview. I was generally a commie, pinko, tree-hugging, liberal, lefty softy. And then I heard an album that talked to me in a way that I recognised about the world that I lived in. It talked about politics, economics, financial exclusion, social exclusion, being treated as a different or a lesser human being because you didn't necessarily fit in with the preconceptions that the world had about you, that you had to, you know, get a car and a dog and 2.4 children and marry the photocopier saleswoman down the road or anything like that. And I just thought, you know, the things that life had laid out before me, and the things which I didn't necessarily want, you know, was to work at Cadbury's or to the HP Sauce factory or the car factory. And this song was talking about how all of these things were real. You know, there was rent and shopping and hit music. What have I done? All these songs spoke about elements of my life. Of course, Neil Tennant had no clue that I, a shy and suburban 14-year-old boy who didn't fit into the world around me, was listening to this song at all. But then there's the lyric about, you know, hit music on the radio, dancing to the songs all night long and all that type of stuff. And you kind of go, well, that's starting to become the soundtrack to my life, is, you know, when you listen to music on the radio. Stock Aitken and Waterman, love them as I do. They are the Motown of the 80s, but all of their songs, I Should Be So Lucky, you know, Never Gonna Give You Up, Nothing Can Divide Us, the Bananarama tracks, they're all songs about, well, I love you, I miss you, don't go, etc. And for somebody that had never been in a relationship, those songs were quite alienating because they were academic concepts about something that had never really existed. I'd never felt it. I understood it as a concept, as an idea, is that I might meet somebody, I might be in a relationship with somebody at some point, that might be lovely. But in my mind, I never had a thought of, yeah, because I'd never experienced it. I had no real life experience to throw towards those lyrics. Whereas it couldn't happen here. Hit music. There were songs about loss and being economically excluded, financial exclusion, about being dispossessed in the world in which I didn't like. And so therefore I connected with it. And then the other thing about It Couldn't Happen Here is that the orchestration is by Angelo Badalamenti. Angelo Badalamenti, for those of you who don't know, soundtracked a number of David Lynch works, including specifically Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks. I think he was either a prodigy or a kind of a assistant to Ennio Morricone, who'd done a number of film soundtracks. And then suddenly there was this perfect melding of three things that I loved. One of which was, you know, powerful lyrics about the world we lived in that I could recognise, the sweeping orchestration of people like Jerry Goldsmith and James Horner and John Williams, and then underneath all of that, interesting atmospheric electronic and synthesizers. It was pretty much the perfect song. And I had the incredible moment to see the Pet Shop Boys play the Royal Albert Hall 7 years ago for their orchestral show for the Teenage Cancer Trust, where they played It Couldn't Happen Here live with an orchestra. They've only played it live twice in the whole of their lives. And I was just like, oh my God, I am watching the song that changed my life. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. I really, really rated that show. And that was when suddenly music wasn't just a background noise. Music was the design for life. Music was the thing that showed me where I was when I was lost. Music found me when I was lost. And it showed me the map as to where I was in the world and gave me things I could recognise in the world around it. And this is where I go metaphor heavy, boys and girls, because two of the first 7 inches I ever got are West End Girls by Pet Shop Boys and True Faith by New Order. And I'm going to go for West End Girls first. This was, I bought that, when I was on holiday in Spain, or I might have got it from Hob Days. And as you can see, this has the 7 inch kind of connector thingy there. I'm going to bring that a lot nearer to you so you can see it. Right, so that's EMI America West End Girls. This one cost me 69 pence. So I spent a lot of time walking to save on bus fare. And if I walked, I could buy myself a 7 inch single. I would go to the newsagents that had the discounted 7 inches in racks alongside mass market pulp paperbacks, the equivalent of the works. Whereas rather than pulp them once they'd printed too many and they'd gone out of the charts, they would then just sell them for basically, like the way in which rich people buy books by the pound. What you would have is you would have 7 inch singles, jukebox holes stamped into them, and then you would have moments where they would sell them once the jukeboxes weren't playing them anymore, or once the songs had fallen out of the charts. And effectively, they punched the hole through to say, yes, that record can't be sold anymore. This here, I'm going to put my hand behind there so you can, actually I'm going to put the 7 inch behind there so you can see it better. So this here, this with the missing hole was how I felt about life before I discovered music. So I felt that, although it was the right shape for the world and I could probably fit into the world, or I could probably make the world work for me, I was rotating at slightly the wrong angle. Like the spindle of life was over here, and I needed to be here in order for me to turn around correctly, rotate correctly, and operate correctly in a way that didn't sound wonky. So that's why I really identified with the 7 inch single, because until I found the music and until I found that, it wasn't something which I felt like I didn't belong in the world. I wasn't operating correctly, and music showed me the way to make sense of the world. This is one of the first 7 inch singles I bought as well after Ghostbusters. This is the 69p X-chart version from the newsagents of New Order's True Faith on 7 inch. And this is my favourite 7 inch adapter. And if you get me to the pub, I will happily talk about how these 7 inch adapters changed my life in a way which perhaps doesn't necessarily make a huge amount of sense to anyone but old people like me. The second band that I loved after Pet Shop Boys and after It Couldn't Happen Here is my friend Rob got a copy of New Order Substance 1987 out of Birmingham Library. Got it on vinyl. We had it for 2 weeks. Is how long you could take it out from the library. So we did a deal. Graham and I would borrow disc 2, which starts with The Perfect Kiss, and has Subculture, State of the Nation, Shell Shock, Bizarre Love Triangle, and True Faith on. And then he'd have disc 1, which has Ceremony, Everything's Gone Green, Temptation, Blue Monday, Confusion, and Thieves Like Us on. And so we'd borrow one disc, and so we recorded disc 2 onto the second side of a 45-minute tape, and we're going to put disc 1 on side 1 of a 45-minute tape, only to find out disc 1 is only about 37 minutes long, so we had 7 extra minutes of spare space, which was annoying. This is not the copy from Birmingham Library. This is the Substance 1987 Factory Edition, which I have and have had for a very, very long time indeed. And I listened to this, and what I heard was that perfect melding of electronics, synthesizers, sweeping dramatic strings, and you could give the drama to music that you didn't necessarily need to have an orchestra for. With synthesizer, you had an orchestra in a box, and then there were lyrics. You know, the lyrics aren't always amazing, but words that I could understand, words that I could sympathize and empathize with about life. And then on top of that, obviously, analog drums and guitars. And you put all of those together, and suddenly you get to the point where you have an understanding about the world. So it wasn't just soundtracks or electronics, or suddenly there was a rock element to everything that was going in there. And I know the cliche about how there's always been a rock element to my dance music. And so therefore I thought, I'm going to start watching the chart show. I'm going to start watching Top of the Pops. And obviously Thursday, 7 p.m. was Top of the Pops, and the chart show was about 11:30 on a Saturday morning. And I started listening to music, and I started connecting to music. And some of it I liked, and some of it I didn't like. But one thing that really came in and changed my life, and suddenly it became everything to me, music. Not just background noise, but everything. The Wonder Stuff and Don't Let Me Down Gently. This song was shown on the chart show. The video of them playing in the desert. And there was just something about this song. The fact that it didn't look like anybody that I'd heard before, didn't look like anybody I'd seen before. There was a bit where he sings about the knife, the blood, the bad, the good, you think you could, which obviously he does far better than I do. But I suddenly was like, that's music made by humans, weird, unusual, funny humans with a sense of humour. And from that moment on, I was in for the rest of my life with music. Music suddenly made sense to me. The world made sense to me. I had a narrative around what was going to happen. I could see the progression that was going to take place in the world around me and the world I was going to live in. I was going to have the ability to have relationships and to see the world in the way in which... Basically, music made me feel not quite so lonely. My records were my friends when and people that were always there for me and listening at various points in my life. And I blame it all on music, which is, you know, not necessarily a bad thing. There was just something about this, and I thought, that's it. I've found my thing now. I've found it. This is the path that I will take through life. Music provided me with the map when I was lost, and it helped me find myself. At that point on, it was the work of art that not only could you dance to, not only could you meet girls to, if that's what you really, really wanted to do, but and I really, really wanted to do that. But also, you know, good people tend to like good bands. You know, if somebody liked the same band as me, I thought, yeah, we've got a lot in common. And after that, that was, you know, pretty much how I choose my friendships, and pretty much how I felt I could go forward in life, making sense of what was going on, because there was a song that could talk to me about every emotion and help me in times when I felt that perhaps I was not necessarily part of the world that I didn't feel like I belonged into. So, one question from Run Out Grooves, one answer: when did music stop being background noise and become a way of life? So, there is one question which I'm going to follow up with from Hinley 7190, which is just, how much money do you think you've spent on music? Well, as you've probably worked out, I have been collecting and enthusiastically hoovering up music through my ears for about the past 40 years. It wouldn't be unrealistic to say that I've spent £150,000 on music over the past 40 years. And that's if you include buying the records, CDs, tapes, t-shirts, gig tickets, flights, hotels, and obviously everything else that goes with it. Which, when you break that down, actually works out at maybe £3,000 a year, which actually isn't that much. You know, I know how much money I spend on music now. It's probably half of the money which I have any discretion over, and that's very reasonable. And I'm trying to bring that number down, by the way, because frankly I'm running out of records to buy and bands to see. It's a lot of money, but you know, it's a drop in the ocean compared to some people. Some people will go, well, you know, Manchester are playing Brazil, so I'm going to go and fly over there. And I'm like, yeah, but they're playing Manchester next week. But it's not the same, is it? But of course, it's all about what people can do and how they make what they've got stretch as far as they reasonably can. I've had a fantastic life. I've had loads of brilliant experiences thanks to music. Had a couple of terrible ones, including some of the very worst bands I've ever heard of, which I won't mention. But it's been worth it, worth every penny. I've danced my ass off. Last night I went to see Underworld at the Alexandra Palace in that there London. They played a 3-hour set. I danced my legs down to the knees. It was fantastic. Everything went away when I did that. You know, money, health, politics, weather, it all disappeared. The only thing that mattered at that point in time, that night, last night, was the music and the bass and the sound and just that moment where everything goes away and you're just feeling the feelings, which is a wonderful experience, and I recommend it highly. So thank you very much for your questions. I will answer some other ones some other time. In the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other, stay beautiful, and as I am going to say, if I can ever find the record, I can't remember where I've stuck it, the question is, who are you going to call? Well, Ghostbusters, there you are. See you later. All right, bye.